This is Saturday Salvation for November the 15th, 2025, here on Following Him, the Disciple Life. We must be thankful not only for our own salvation, but for the salvation of others. Consider what is said in Romans chapter 6, beginning of verse 17. But God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered, and having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. Now, there is much taught in just those two verses about salvation. A reminder of what we were before salvation, slaves of sin. A reminder of what is part of being saved, obedience. There is a response required on our part. It has to be from the heart. If you recall the Ethiopian eunuch, when he asked about baptism, what is it that he was told? That he had to believe with all his heart. If you believe with all your heart, you may. And this was to a pattern of teaching, a form of doctrine. They were to obey the gospel. And if we look earlier in chapter 6 of Romans, we can see how we make contact with and we reenact the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus in baptism. And from this point on, we have a statement of discipleship, having been set free from sin. That's salvation, that initial salvation where we begin to be a disciple. We become a slave of righteousness. Of course, we understand that a slave of righteousness is not the same as slavery to sin. It is a freedom that we have in the Christ. And this being a slave of righteousness, you're becoming a disciple of the ultimate teacher, of the ultimate rabbi, of the Messiah, of the Son of God himself. So much there about salvation. We could make that into a big sermon with a bunch of other subpoints. But notice how he begins the sentence there in verse 17. But God be thanked. But God be thanked. Paul found joy in the salvation of others. Paul was thanking God, but God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, he was thankful for their salvation. When we approach how we thank God for salvation, it needs to not just be about ourselves. We love our neighbor as ourselves, and there's a lot that is implied by that very concept. So when you give thanks, here we have Paul. Of course, Paul is not ultimately our example. Christ is our example, but we are imitators of the apostles as they are imitators of Christ. That principle there in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1. But as we regard the salvation of others, we regard salvation in general, let's make sure that we are giving thanks that others have been saved too. This is the work of God. This is what the Messiah was all about. And so let's not just make this an us thing. I mean, you really can't do Christianity right if you make it a you thing. It is a Christ thing. It's all about Jesus. But rather make sure you're giving thanks for the salvation, not just for yourself, but for others. You have a great rest of the day, and shalom.